WFJA 105.5, Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.
It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
Good evening, Lewis. How are you doing?
Fabulous.
It's nice to see you. We were gone last week. I was in Dallas chasing that little golf ball that I love to play. And Lewis, what were you doing?
I was actually helping someone get into treatment.
You know what? I think that speaks volumes. And so I'm glad that we're back. The show tonight is a pretty, I think, very important show. The cost of addiction to the families of the addict or the alcoholic. And, you know, we talk about the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction as a disease, but it's a family disease. It's not the addict or the alcoholic is not the only person impacted. The families, the friends, the people who have relationships with the alcoholic or the addict, they probably suffer more, some would argue. And tonight we have a guest. She's a friend of mine. I used to work with her. And she paid, or her family has paid the ultimate price, the loss of a child to addiction. And so we'll talk to her a little bit later on. But Lewis, your thoughts on the disease of addiction and the cost to the families?
Well, and we've talked about this, Macon. We hear often in the public sector cost as a relation to dollars and cents, and there are costs. I mean, some of the cost, it's estimated annually that it costs the U.S. $740 billion a year in lost work productivity, healthcare and additional associated costs related to crime. 23 million Americans suffer from it, while only about a little over 10% actually receives any kind of help. But the cost that I think, which goes relatively unnoticed, and it's under the radar, are the costs to families and relationships. And well, I'm sure at some point we'll get around to employers, jobs, and we've already touched on it briefly, but the devastation to families cannot be underscored at all. This is a real, that's to me is the real problem.
Well, and also the cost is a lifetime cost. It's not one that you can account for and make it go away. I mean, let's speak about this from a personal perspective. I mean, we're both in recovery. I know what it cost my family when I was in active addiction. It cost us our money, cost us our house, cost us, so many different things. And today, I'm 7 years removed from active addiction. But my kids, my kids had to learn how to live a different lifestyle than the one that I was able to provide when I was in active addiction. And what are the effects to my kids? I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, I guess time will tell as they grow up and they have their own families, but you can't argue with the fact that I've impacted them. They had no say-so. It wasn't something they got a vote in. They're the child of a father who was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and it's we use the term fair. It's not fair, but it's the reality.
Well, and also you've got to look at the fact that since we know it's a disease of it's in your DNA, I always question who in my family have I affected or infected as a result of my passing this disease on to them. I've got 5 grandchildren, and every day I wake up and wonder which one of them is going to be fall prey to this.
Yeah, and we had dinner tonight, as we always do before the show, and we talked about the ripple effect that drug addiction can has and how it can show up in so many other places. It's not the alcoholic who ends up with health problems or ends up in detox or ends up in treatment. It's the families, it's the parents, it's the brother or the sister, and so things spin out of control so fast. It's one of those things that when we talk about $740 billion a year in lost productivity, I mean, how do you put a dollar figure on a family being destroyed? I mean, we're going to talk to Jan, who's call us here in a few minutes, or we'll call her in a few minutes. She lost her daughter, and how do you wake up every morning and face that? Those are the challenges that families face, and those are the things that addiction and substance abuse and addiction, those are the situations that are created. And when I was drinking and drugging, I didn't think about any of that stuff.
Well, I know that when I was coming up, and I'm 63, you're not far behind me, I don't believe.
I'm 62.
Like I said, you're not far behind me. But back when we were coming up in our 20s and 30s, people did die from addiction. It just wasn't publicized like it is today. And I don't think, I think the numbers bear it out, weren't dying at the level that they're dying now. In fact, I know they're not, because if you take it back 20 years, the numbers were minuscule compared to now. To me, that's the game changer, that people now are dying at an elevated rate. And because of the drugs, and we've discussed this on other programs, because of the drugs that they're taking are so much more potent than the ones that we took, particularly the heroin that's laced with fentanyl. You can die instantly. And to me, that's where you go from this innocence to a nightmare in a very short period of time. Families who never ever thought they would be going through this are devastated in very short order.
And the numbers, as we talk about, the numbers are staggering. And these are reported numbers. I think we all agree that the numbers are underreported, the way they account for various aspects of this disease. But, according to some of the information that I researched today, in 2017, there were 70,200 deaths were attributed to a drug overdose, including illicit drugs and prescription opioids. In 1999, that number was 16,849. So,
wow.
That's the kind of, that is a epidemic, any way you want to describe it, and especially the deaths involving heroin. In 1960, there were 1,999 deaths attributed to a heroin overdose. In 2017, it was almost 16,000.
Yeah.
And so, those are the kinds of things. And when I think about all the things that I lost and all the things that I cost my family, I started looking at what it costs to be an addict or an alcoholic. I mean, just pure revenue. And these are some of the numbers that I came up with. And I was discussing them with my wife, and we both agreed. Taylor made the comment, well, it depends on who you're talking about, but just from an average perspective, somebody who is addicted to cocaine can spend as much as $8,000 a year. Some people can spend that in a week. Heroin, there's 652,000 Americans that suffer from a heroin use disorder, and some of them can spend upwards of $54,000 a year. Now that's real money.
And you make that, which gets back to how are they getting that money, which turns down the path of a life of crime.
Right.
Which again changes the dynamic altogether.
Right. And the criminal activity brings into all these other unintended consequences that affect families on a daily basis. And so those are the kinds of things we want to talk about. And so I know we got Jan on the phone. I think I want to bring her on. I'll introduce her to our listeners, and we'll get to talking with Jan about what addiction cost her. Good evening, Jan.
Hi, Macon.
How are you doing tonight?
Well, I've had a lot of tears today.
Yeah, I know. Well, I didn't tell our listeners. And first off, let me introduce you to Lewis. Lewis Finch.
Hi,
this
Lewis.
is Jan.
Hey, Jan.
So, Jan, when I called you to be a guest on the show, it just so happened that today is the 1 year anniversary of you losing your precious daughter. And I thought,
Yes.
God does work in so many different mysterious ways. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your day, and then tell us a little bit about how your family's been affected by the disease of addiction.
Well, I count today as the day of Jordy's death because I was staying down at Litchfield with my mom, and my husband had come home, and Jordy had been living with us because she had already admitted to being an addict, and she needed our help, and, a lot of really bad things that happened to her at college that were, as you all discussed, they're directly related to life where you're addicted to drugs and you're hiding it from everybody, especially with young women. And we had brought Jordy home to be with us, and we'd made it past a suicide attempt. And that was shortly after I brought her home 2 years before her death because she had been raped by two men. And she had been raped the night I had just had dinner with her, and she said she was going home to study. She was in college, and the next morning I went over to say goodbye to her, and she told me what had happened, and she thought she had been roofied. And the thing about it is what she said to me is, "Mom, I'm going to die if you don't bring me home." She said, I have a problem, and I'm going to be like Bailey. And Bailey's my oldest daughter, and I just got off the phone talking to her, and she gave me permission to talk about her because currently she is relapsed and is working on a program and is sober now for today. But we all know that today, a year ago, Jordy came to the beach to see me, and 2 weeks prior to that, she had lost her high school boyfriend to a drug overdose and actually a suicide. And I think that's probably what made her relapse, but I didn't know she had relapsed. And she came to the beach to see us, and we're in literally $1 million condo overlooking the ocean and enjoying talking about going to Frank's and having shrimp. And I made her a great meal, and we snuggled, and I showed her all the golf clothes I had bought. And she was a good golfer, and Jordy could hit the ball 240. Macon knew that, and I'm a golfer too. And so we shared an unbelievably amazing evening. And then she told me she couldn't sleep, and she didn't want to talk about Steven. She had broken up with him a long time ago, but Jordy was the type of person that always loved everybody and always tried to help everybody because her sister has been, affected by the disease since she was 14, and Jordy didn't really get affected by the disease until way later in life. So on this particular night, she couldn't sleep, and she scratched my back, and I scratched hers, and we were listening to the ocean, and I said, "Honey, I got to go to sleep." And then she was in the same bed with me in the front ocean room. And I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she wasn't in bed. And I went around the corners looking for her, and I went outside looking for her, and then I went, "Oh, no, Lord," because I just felt something was wrong. And I went around the corner into the bedroom that she used to sleep in when she was a kid, and I found her in the bathroom. And she was dead, and she was slumped over, and she had this long, beautiful red hair. And I never saw the needle. I didn't see anything. I just saw her. And she had had seizures and migraines, and that's how she got addicted to pain meds. And so I just kind of pulled her down off the slump out position, and her purse was wide open, and I laid her out on the floor, and I just looked at her. And to this day, I don't know if I saw her in color or black and white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was just like, no. And I couldn't save her.
Yeah.
And I woke my mom up, and she came in, and she was like, "Oh, no." not Jordy, and my mom is 89. I mean, you remember Go-Go. And
Oh, yeah.
So my mom just told me, Jan, you got to snap too. We got to call the coroner. We have to do all these things. And, I don't want anybody to ever have to go through that. And so at 4 o'clock in the morning, I had to call my husband and make it all. The only thing I could come up with was Jordy's dead.
Yeah, I don't know how you have a conversation, Jan. I mean, I can't begin to imagine what that conversation and what your frame of mind must be like.
Well, it's like you just don't believe it, and then all these people come in and out, and they're looking at you, and they're wondering if it's fentanyl, and then they don't want to touch anything, and yet I had called 911, and 911 told me to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? I just gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So there's the ignorance of our world. What if that was fentanyl? It could have killed me too.
Yeah.
And I don't know what she died of. I mean, we had to make decisions. We had to get her cremated. My husband had to get in the car and drive to the beach. And my mom had, literally we were up 24 hours and we came home and so many people rallied around me. I didn't get a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
I think I didn't get judgment because this is not the daughter they thought wasn't going to make it. I think everybody was shocked that it was Jordy.
Yeah, and Jan, you and I, we talked a lot yesterday, and we've talked a lot again today, and you recognize, you're a year removed from that horrible, horrible night, but I'm sure that it never completely goes away, but I think that you've developed, I hate to use the term respect, but certainly an appreciation for the disease and just how heinous it is.
It is heinous. We've been struggling with this disease, and I have a beautiful daughter who is still here and very strong, and she's been battling the disease since she was 14, and had a lot of bad consequences. And as a mom, the things that you have to do to help your kids get sober are reprehensible. There are so many people that could not do what I've had to do, and the only way I was able to do it is because God. I felt a sense of peace when she died, and I felt God telling me I rewarded her. I brought her home, honey. She's where she belongs. I prayed that Jordy would find the right man, and Jesus brought her home. That's the man that saved her, and God wrapped her up in his arms and brought her home and said, Satan, you didn't win this battle. I got my girl.
Yeah.
And that's where I have to say to myself, I spoke at the funeral and I outed the disease because so many people hide it. Like you said, I heard you guys talking about, it was a car accident, it was this, it was that. No, it wasn't. It was alcoholism.
Right.
No, it wasn't. It was drug addiction. What are we so afraid of? That's what makes me the maddest. It makes me outraged when people say, maybe she shouldn't have been partying too much, or, you don't know that she's in heaven for sure. And I'm like, oh, yes, I do.
Well, I have to tell you, I obviously respect you a tremendous amount for how you address all the stuff that you've had to address. But I was wondering, looking back on it, do you recognize any of the stuff that was happening? We have people who will be listening tonight who, maybe somebody else doesn't have to go through what you went through if they hear something, some wisdom from you, or you've had a year to reflect on Jordy and her life. Anything that comes to mind that you would that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I think that as parents, we need to be educated about every drug that our child takes, especially prescriptions. One thing is that doctors are very quick to whip out that little pad and write you a prescription for something. And I've been fighting with the doctors, and I was my child's advocate since she was young. For one, I would never put a child on Adderall. Never. Adderall is meth. And Adderall leads to really bad things I would do as much holistic as I could. Also, too, I would recognize the triggers. I would recognize there's always a root to every problem. People just don't, they'll call it generational curses or whatever, but there's a root to every problem that leads someone to, like for Jordy, she was trying to numb her pain. But it's not like you can go through a drive-through window making and go, oh, can you like help me with the fact that my daughter was raped? You know, it's just, I think the way to get sober requires an enormous amount of pain. And a mom has to allow their child to experience huge consequences. Jail, prison, whatever it takes. And then you have to just love them through their consequences. I would also say that anybody who suspects something that's going on with their children, talk to them, open a dialogue before it's too late. You know, if you've got addiction in your family, like my husband lost his mom and he lost his dad. I'm older than his mom was. She died at 52. I'm 64 now. My husband's younger, as you know, and he lost both parents. I also feel like in a lot of ways I was always focusing on what Bailey was going through and not seeing that Jordy was in pain as well. If I'd have gotten Jordy help a long time ago, if I'd have, a lot of parents will say, oh, they're just partying. Well, an addict doesn't party. An addict has a craving, and an addict, as you know, for one, I hate that word. I wish we could call it brain disease or whatever. Jordy was in a rehab facility, and she had seizures and migraines, and so I had to pull her out of it because they didn't have the correct hospitalization there for her. And she came into the kitchen. It was my birthday. It was September, and she died in November. And she said to me, Mom, my friends at my group think I've relapsed. And see, that was Jordy telling me, Mom, I relapsed. I feel really bad about it. And that night on my birthday, I had run a golf tournament, and I came home, and she was on the floor in her bedroom, passed out. And I said, Jordy, are you on something? Are you doing something? So for one, I hate to say it this way, but how do you know an addict is lying? Their lips are moving.
Yeah.
So I should have called 911 right at that moment and gotten her there. And then also Narcan. I hate to say it, but there's a drug now where, isn't that the right one, Make?
Yeah.
Yep.
Narcan.
Yeah.
And if I'd have known about that, maybe I would have kept it with me. But more than that, I probably would have tried to find a place for her to be where most kids need to be away from the world for about a year. They just do. They need to be locked up and away from all the temptations. They need to get counseling. It's very expensive to do. I spent, lots of money on my oldest, and it didn't work. And now I'm allowing her to direct her own recovery, but she's had enough pain that she wants to recover. And with Jordy, I think I got tricked. I think a lot of times she was cruising the ER, oh gosh, I feel really bad. What was she cruising for? She was cruising for pain meds.
Yeah.
So I would take her to the ER and go, oh, I'm really sorry that you're having, female problems. Oh, Mom, it hurts so bad. And I told you before, I recognized it when she was a junior in high school. She had her tonsils out. She'd never really done drugs before then. And I'm talking getting your tonsils out. You don't do that without being anesthetized,
Yeah.
And she wakes up and she goes, Mommy, I'm high. I'm so sorry I'm high. I know that, that's the last thing you want to see me. And I was, oh, baby girl. I said, you can't go through this without. And then I didn't recognize it. And then later on, she had her wisdom teeth taken out. And she goes, Mom, I could relapse if I take this. That's where you need to recognize it. Once an addict, always an addict. And if they have to go through it, after she was exposed to pain meds again, she probably needed to go back into a detox.
Yeah. Well, Jan, we talked about it earlier. Sobriety is not something that you can purchase, and you spent
No.
you spent a lot of money. I mean, I recognize and certainly understand the pain comment. I mean, I think anybody who gets to recovery, who's fortunate enough to get to recovery, it's usually you've experienced enough pain that it makes. It becomes less attractive to get high than it does to stay sober. And I know that sounds simplistic, but I will tell you, from me personally, I don't ever want to be back in the situation that I got myself out of. And that keeps me, we call it the gift of desperation. And, unfortunately for Jordy, and we say it all the time, some people, the disease kills people. It does. And it took your daughter, and it's got its sight on your other daughter. And at least, maybe there's something good that'll come out of what happened to Jordy where Bailey's concerned. And that's what we all pray for. But, what I really want to talk about is Jan and John. I mean, how do you guys live?
Well, here's the situation. When I called John, for one, it puts an enormous pressure on a marriage. And if you think about it, I don't even want to know the statistics, but I would bet you that a majority of people separate and divorce, especially if they went through what we went through. So what John and I did is, when we found out Bailey was an addict, we went full force as best as we could, and we took her to Cumberland Heights. 60 days later, she came out used again because it was forced on her. And then there were other series of things that I told you I really didn't want to talk about Bailey, but she said, Mom, fire away, say whatever you want to, because, maybe you'll help somebody, and maybe they won't lose their sister. She lost her sister, but also she lost a lot of her life struggling with addiction. But for John and for me, we had contracts with our kids, and then they would break them. And so we had to set very clear boundaries. And when your child is an addict, chances are you're going to be stolen from. Chances are they can figure out your codes. Chances are they can get into your bank accounts. Chances are they'll get into your wallet. I mean, I don't even keep cash around anymore. It's just a habit, And the other part is, too, what happened to John and me is it's called he said, she said. That's what I call it. He has a way of approaching it. I have a way of approaching it. He would say, they're dead to me. And I would say, how can you say your children are dead to you? And he said, well, as long as they're using, I can't go back to that pain again. And he didn't mean it that way, but I would take it in the wrong way. So we got counseling, and we got spiritual counseling. And we got to the point where we realized there was a lot of toxicity in our marriage, and we had to have very strong boundaries that we didn't allow addiction in our house. So my children had times when they were homeless, and they were not welcome back into my house. But I would always have them text me. We always had this little thing because they always kept up with Mommy. He couldn't handle it. He was doing the work. I was doing work too. But we talked a lot. We would always come outside and talk a lot. And the most important thing is that he didn't smother me and tell me how to handle my pain. And he let me discover certain things, and he gently led me through the process. And he would say to me, especially after Jordy died, he said, I hate to say this, but now you know how I feel. I lost my mom. I lost my dad. And he said, of course I love my children, but I don't understand why it happened to us. We were a good family. I coached basketball. I did this. I did that. And that's where you have to continuously go back to, it's a disease. And if somebody had cancer, they'd be rallying around you again. I'm going to pray for you. Oh, it's so bad. Oh, my gosh, I can't believe that your son's cancer came back. Well, why can't I go, oh, my daughter relapsed? Oh, and you can't. It's sad. It still has to be anonymous in so many ways, but it's a disease. And the beauty of it is that I am closer to God now than I've ever been. I have the best marriage I've ever had. Yeah, we've had a lot of loss, but we stuck together, and we respected each other's boundaries, and we put God first, and we put our marriage second, and we go to Al-Anon, and in Al-Anon I work a 12-step program because my addiction is to try to think that I can outmaneuver God and I can fix my children, because what mother wouldn't want to? I mean, what mother wouldn't just do anything to help their child? And I'm being told I can't help them? It's contrary to everything. So you have to have a marriage where you say to each other, I love you, you're doing the best that you can, we'll get through this. Or maybe we won't. But they won't. But we will. So, like, the day after Jordy's funeral, I mean, I told you that, we were on our way to Roanoke, Virginia, and we went and we worked together, and we give ourselves periods of time to talk about it, and then other times we say, no, we're not going to talk about it, we're going to work, we're going to play golf, we're going to take care of ourselves, we're going to do yoga. The most important thing is, if mommy ain't right, ain't nobody going to be right. You have to take care of yourself, because it takes so much strength to do nothing. I mean, I hate to say that. It takes so much strength to do nothing. I never really thought of it that way. But, like, the worst thing I did was to bring Jordy home here and not figure out a way for her to go into some other rehab facility, thinking that if I loved her enough, I could help her.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's not.
Yeah, but I think that's a parent's. I've got, I can't tell you how many parents I talk to, and I'm going to let Lewis ask you. He's been writing notes, and I know he's got some things he wants to ask you, but I can't tell you how many times I've explained to parents, especially parents with resources, that their resources can't make a difference. That
It won't.
I mean,
No.
it doesn't make. It's counterintuitive that they can't fix things. You can't fix an addict. An addict has to fix an addict, and it's hard, Jan. I mean, we're both. We're both alphas. I mean, we always have been. We've worked together. We know each other, and it doesn't make the one thing we never want to hear is you can't do something, and you really can't.
Right.
You really can't. And
well, I'll tell you what I did. Because you're bringing this to mind. I mean, tonight before we got on the phone, I texted these girls, and I've told you that there are these girls that are living in a condo. I bought 2 condos. One was for each girl, and they were to rent from me. And didn't work out that way, but God provided a beautiful tenant for the other one. And for my other condo, these 2 girls have just moved in. They were in Jordy's class at Dove's Nest, which is where Jordy was, only they graduated, and Jordy was given an honorary degree. But these girls have been clean and sober, and they knew Jordy, and they just texted me, I know what today is, Mama Jan. You're so strong. Your faith is out there. You're doing everything right. Jordy loved you. You were her rock. You loved her through it all, and she couldn't have made it without you. And then I ask them all the time, I said, well, do I let them go completely? And these are girls, of course, and they go, no, you don't enable them, but you always let them know you love them. And you don't buy them a car. You don't pay their bills. You allow them their consequences, because in nature there's no such thing as rewards and punishment. There are consequences. And we moms, especially in this modern age, especially those of us that are really well off, which we're very well off, we're very blessed, we worked really hard for it, made a lot of money at the Fox under Macon, by the way, and banked it, but I spent a lot on it. But also the other thing is that, and like Macon says, you cannot buy your way out of this disease. It hits everybody. But you can support people, and you can acknowledge those people that are in recovery that need your support and rally around them. And they give me tons of wisdom. I ask them how I should handle certain situations, and they go, I hated my mom too, but if my mom hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have gotten sober. So I would say Al-Anon, be close to addicts that are in recovery, not those that are using. Gotta stay away from that. That's like kudzu. I mean, when my kids were using, I described it as kudzu. I couldn't see them. They weren't there. That's what John meant by they're dead to me. But also, too, you know, a mother's love and a father's love, it never ends.
Well, Jan, this is Lewis, by the way.
Hey, Lewis.
I've been just taking everything you're saying in, and this is going to sound very hollow, but I am heartbroken for this situation your family has got to go through. I am not even going to attempt to tell you I understand it. In fact, I've even said I did lose someone very close to me, but it wasn't one of my children, and I don't know how you can even live with it that way. And to me, you sound like you've actually not only lived through it, you've also persevered through it, and you're still going through it.
Oh, yeah.
I would like to, you kind of touched on this earlier, for those that are tuned in that might, because I think you did a great job of painting the picture of how desperate and what can happen if, but can you take us back to when you kind of sort of did this already, but when did you start noticing how young were the girls when you started noticing what was going on?
Well, my oldest was, okay, I pinpoint this one time. I picked up my daughter from school. She was going to private school. She was only in 8th grade, and she goes, Mommy, I go away, and then I come back and class is over. And I said, what do you mean by that? She goes, well, I completely lose focus. So I realized that her brain was different. Her brain, her left brain, and her right brain are equal. So we put her in a special program. She's brilliant, though. For one, people who are afflicted with this disease are usually brilliant, and it is brain disease. So I noticed when I first put her on Adderall, because I was told to by the school, she really could function at a really high level. She could do better. She won the states in tennis that year in her division. And I was like, wow, this is great. I mean, and back then, all the moms everybody was trying to get Adderall because for one, it made you lose weight. For another, it was supposed to be the miracle drug for your kids. Well, then as years progressed, and I would take her to a lot of different tennis events, I would notice, and Macon could probably tell you that, you can really tell something when somebody's struggling because she would lose a match or she would get angry, like her behavior changed. There was anger that started cropping up. She would take the car and say she was at somebody's house for the weekend, and she wouldn't have gone there. She had gone to some guy's house that she met. Or you can see, as a mom, you have to be open to seeing a behavioral change. And usually with the behavioral change, there's anger associated with it. There's a rebellious attitude associated with it because they want those drugs more than they want anything. And they will do anything to go get over those drugs. They'll barrel over their best friend to get to them, and you can get them to therapy. Probably what happens is at about the age of 14 or 15 is when it starts happening, is when I've been told. Because at the first rehab we went to, I walked into the room and I was like, this is not the club I thought I was going to join. And I was so upset. And I just remember crying. And this woman came over to me and she hugged me and she just said, you just look like you needed a hug. And I think I was just in such denial. And then, these kids go to parties and they throw pills in a bowl and they take one. And I also noticed that, I don't know if you remember, Macon, when I had neck surgery, I was prescribed pain meds. And I remember going into my closet and realizing, gosh, my meds are gone. So a lot of parents don't recognize this either, and they need to be aware of it, that whatever drugs you have in your closet or your cabinet, your kids have access to it. You have to be responsible for that. And then with with Jordy, the one who died, I think I was so worn out from trying so hard to help Bailey, and that I think I was in denial. I think I was like, no, there's no way that I got a second one that's going to struggle with these issues. Because, I mean, Bailey's a beautiful girl, absolutely drop-dead gorgeous, and she was on homecoming court, and state-ranked tennis player, and the disease got her, but she's strong, and she's made it. And Jordy didn't. Jordy didn't because I don't know why. It is a family disease. Sometimes you're just worn out, and get educated.
Janet, when you were describing that, by the way, you did a beautiful job of laying that out, hopefully for other people listening in. The thing that caught me was when all this took place, she was also going through adolescence. And how do you know what's adolescence and addiction?
Oh, there's a big difference. There's a big difference. For one, they change. I remember a pot pipe being mailed to our house one day, and I got the pipe out, and it was like multicolored. And if she ever heard this podcast, she'd probably laugh at me about it, because I was like, that's a pot pipe, right? And is that yours? Oh, no, that's not mine. That's Hannah's, or that's so-and-so. So there you go with, and then you look at your husband and you go, well, is that? Oh, that's just kids. They're just partying or whatever like that. No, there's a distinctive difference between an addict, because what happens with an addict, if you're close to your friends, and let's say they go on trips with your friends, if your friends' moms call you up and they tell you, look, they weren't acting right, or they weren't acting normal. Be aware of that. What happens with an addict is they try it, and all of a sudden they're like, wow, I'm better on this. Wow, this worked for me. Like, hey, I'll drink a little bit of coffee. Let me just do a bump of Coke. Well, I got to take an Adderall because I got to concentrate today and make it through my day. And, now I'm going to do, like, this high caffeine drink. And, now I'm going to smoke a little pot, and I'm going to bring myself down for the night. I mean, that is the secret life of an addict. And it's a secret life. They don't want anybody to know it. But there's a distinctive change in behavior. There's glassy eyes. There's sneakiness. There's money missing. They lay out a sign, a trail. They lay out a trail. And you just don't want to see it.
Yeah, and you have to, Jan, I know that you have to call them on it, and it's just hard to make yourself do that because you love them so much. And you deep down inside, you want to say they're just being kids, but you don't have the ability to look into the future and realize that you're just seeing a prediction, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I could talk to you all night about this, but we've only got a few minutes left, and I wanted to. You and I had a conversation earlier, and I really want to talk about it because there's this stigma that you have had to deal with. And, social media platforms are so dangerous. They're so dangerous because they become pits of judgment. And for other parents who have lost children to the disease, other events associated with the disease, how do you handle that? You and I talked about that this afternoon, and I mean, you really do have to get to the point where either you have to wean yourself off of social media because you'll discover bullies and judgmental comments. Speak to that a little bit, because I think that you're dealing with it in a the only way you know how to, which is head on. But it's a main part of the journey that you're on.
Well, it's a mean part, and I think it's mean for those that are struggling with the disease too, because it's like I told you about gossip. What I learned, and I learned it from my daughter, my wife's daughter. She said, "Mom, don't share my story. You blab my story to everybody," because what happens when you're a mom is you feel like you need everybody to understand what you're going through because you don't want to be judged. Well, now I'm over that. I mean, I know what the end game is. The end game is you lose your child. I've lost my child. And I stood in judgment at the church, and I didn't even prepare. I just spoke, and it was completely Holy Spirit. And so what I've looked at is I understand clearly that this is a disease. And so I have this quest on social media where I post things that aren't mean, but they're like, this is a disease. The other part is, too, when people are toxic in my life, I wipe them out. I forgive them, but I don't go back to that well. I surround myself with people that understand the disease. I have best friends who've lost their children. And then I compartmentalize, because I go to Al-Anon meetings where I work my 12-step program. That's where I share the nuts and bolts and the nitty-gritty because you can't repeat it. And then in my social media, I keep it kind of light, but I make my point. And then when I go to Bible study, I don't share everything there. And then let's say I'm going to water aerobics or whatever, and somebody asks me how things are. How are the girls? Fine. I don't talk about it. And then I let only certain people into my inner circle because, like what you and I talked about, I answer to God. God judges me. He's the only person that can judge me. And in the Bible, David did horrible things, and he was God's favorite. And you have to go back to things and realize that all of us are sinners. We all have to lay it at the cross. And if somebody's going to judge you, well, it's kind of Saturday Night Live-ish. Remember Jane? It was like, Jane, you ignorant slut. And, when they were doing that thing back and forth on Saturday Night Live. And then you have to have a sense of humor about it. But you have to compartmentalize the grief, and you have to get rid of toxicity. And you have to surround yourself with people that will lift you up. Because there's so many people out there like you and I were talking to Macon where they're going, oh, my God, I guess I'm doing everything right because I didn't lose my kid. There were comments that were made before the funeral that were like, what's going on in that house? And I was furious. I had friends that said, well, it's good you weren't on that trip with us because your grief would have been overwhelming for us. And I'm like, overwhelming? So I get blessed by people that tell me, you keep me sober, Miss Jan. There's a little girl that's living in my condo now, and I don't know if I've repeated myself or not, but she relapsed the day that Jordy died. And she went to, I don't know, what do you call it, the detox making?
Yep.
She went to detox the night Jordy died, and she just texted me today. Why did she text me that? It's a God thing because I asked her if I could share it, and she's been sober ever since. And she thinks about Jordy all the time, and she said Jordy would light up her room. And she said, I miss her so much. And I have another little girl that teaches me how to handle things, and she says, my mom loved me through it. And then, bullying that's on social media and all these things. I mean, I thought about taking down my Facebook, but on my Facebook, I believe I have a following of people that are inspired by what I say. Do I like being an inspiration because my kid died? Oh, no, absolutely not. It's the worst thing you'll ever go through. But would I do anything to help a mom not have to go through what I am? Yes, I would. And I want my daughter's life to matter. And she lit up a room. She helped everybody so much that I believe that she did exactly what God wanted her to do. I believe she went where angels feared to tread, and she helped people, but she just got too close to the darkness.
Yeah.
But I also believe that God reached down and said, I got you, baby girl.
Well,
and I'll see her again.
Yeah, you're the positive way that you communicate is amazing given the grief and the loss. And it's something I hope other people who are dealing with this, because listen, Jan, I mean, it happens every day. You know, people
Oh, it
die from
happens
this
so much.
disease, and your story, as horrific as it is never, I mean, you don't have to look far to find somebody going through the exact same thing. And so I really appreciate your willingness to talk about it. I'll have you on again. And before I close out with you, I'm gonna let Lewis. I think Lewis wanted to say maybe one more thing to you.
Well,
Okay.
and this probably should have been asked a while back, but how quick of a learning curve do you recommend parents get on?
Well, I would say you probably want to get educated about things if you have children, period. Probably about at the age of 12, be aware of it. Be educated about all sorts of drugs. Be educated about, let's put it this way. Did the doctors study it in med school? No. Nobody studies addiction. So I think the more loudmouths like Macon and me out there, Macon and I, whatever you want to say, if Macon and I aren't afraid to talk about it, maybe other parents will go, well, you know what, my kid is kind of acting like that. I mean, I would say if you want to save your child's life and you feel like they're getting into drugs, I would get on it as fast as possible. I would go to an addiction counselor. I would go to Al-Anon first as a parent. That's huge because you learn from other people, experience, strength, and hope. I mean, it's the three things, and there's more God behind those doors than anywhere. I would keep my kids in church. I would educate them about addiction. But I'm not sure Lewis, I'm not sure you could stop anybody. I mean, if you're an addict and you try a drug, I mean, maybe Macon could clarify it better than somebody else, but it chemically changes something in your brain. I mean, there was a guy who was helping me try to unlock Jordy's phone after she died, and he said, do you mind me asking how your daughter died? And I said, well, she died of, opioid addiction, and I don't really know. My mom saw a needle. I didn't. And he said, well, I was an addict, and I got on, Suboxone?
Yep.
He said, and it saved my life. And see, Jordy had come to me early on and said, Mom, I think I need to be on Suboxone. And I was like, no, that's just another drug doing another drug. And there are conflicting reviews on that,
Jan, it's funny you would mention that. We actually had on our last show, we had an addictionologist, and medicated assisted treatment, which is what you're talking about, is now being shown as one of the most effective treatments for opiate addiction. And so, I mean, if you can control the intake and a person can get their medication in the morning and have a normal day, there's a lot of people that think that's a good thing. And I happen to be one of them. I mean, and I
would probably take the opposite view from you only because I was ignorant of it. And then later on, I found out there was somebody that I knew very close, had no idea they had an opioid addiction, and they got off of opioids by being on Suboxone. And I was like, oh my gosh, I ignored my daughter when she asked for that.
Well, but you, I mean, how were you supposed to know about it? I mean, that's one of the things we hope the show can provide is a resource, some information. So, listen, Jan, we're running out of time. I can't tell you how much I love you for being on, and for it's a special day for you to share it with us. We really appreciate it. We do have a friend of the show here who has lost a child, and I'm gonna hook you guys up off the air and talk about support and talk about some of the things that people need to share, people who have experienced the kind of loss that you guys have. So I'll do that off air. But thanks. My love to John as well, and I hope to see you sooner and later.
Yeah, Make. I think the thing is, if you share it, chances are a bunch of people are going to share back with you, like, hey, my brother's an addict, or my sister was an addict, or my dad was. And as long as you're not afraid to share it, it'll open up a dialogue, and it'll eventually make people be less judgmental of it.
Well, you know what? It's a process. Jan, and it's an educational process that has to happen. But more people are talking about it. Less people are. You're not embarrassed to talk about it. I'm not embarrassed to tell people I'm a recovering
No.
alcoholic and drug addict. And, you know, I spent an awful lot of my life hiding that fact. And so, you know, somebody was telling me the other day, sunshine's the best disinfectant. I mean, you got to expose all this stuff. And I guess we'll continue to do that. But, you know,
Good for you to make.
you telling your story about Jordy, somebody that you love so much, and you know, let's face it, you're in the middle of you continue the battle with your daughter Bailey, and so we wish you the best of luck with her.
Yeah, and she's a beautiful child, and she's I'm proud of her. It's a struggle. It's a lifetime struggle. I'm proud of you too, Macon.
Oh, well, you're sweet.
But we moms and we people, we families, it's the entire family gets affected by it, and the more educated you are about it, the less you're like, oh, they're a bad person, and the more you're like, they have a disease. It's like cancer. The more that we can, you got to support them. You got to support people, but you don't want to enable them. And unless you've been to Al-Anon, you won't know what enabling means.
That's a fact. Well, listen, if anybody out there listening tonight wants to reach out to Jan, you can go to the recoveryboys.com, and there are comment lines, or there are opportunities to email Lewis or email me. And we'll get if you want some information, or if you want to reach out to Jan, we'll make sure that happens. And Jan, you have a wonderful night. I'm thinking about you, and I look forward to catching up with you next time.
All right. Thanks for all you do, you guys. Nice to meet you, Louis.
Thanks, Jan.
All right. Bye, Meg.
Goodbye, Jan. Tell John hey.
All right. Night-night.
Night. All right. So Jan is. I mean, she's an amazing lady. She's been a friend of mine for a long time. But, you know, as I mentioned, we also have here in Lee County, there's a group that I wanted to make everybody aware of. It's called the Light of Hope. It's in child loss. It's a support group. They meet every other Tuesday night. The next meeting is October the 29th. And so if you're here in Lee County, and you've experienced the loss of a child through addiction or through any other, certainly addiction and all the other. There's a lot of that death that happens. But if you've lost a child and you're looking for support, this is a closed group, but we'll make sure and put you in touch with the folks that run it. It's called Light of Hope. It's about child loss. And if you go to the recoveryboys.com, you can email me, and I will put you in touch with the folks here in Lee County that run that group. And, you know, Lewis, it's hard. You know, you heard the emotion in Jan. You know, it's heartbreaking. I knew her girls. They grew up in my radio station in Charlotte. And, you know, it's one thing to hear about it, but it's something else when you experience it from a personal perspective.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, that was probably one of the best discussions I have heard from a person having gone through that. She's incredibly articulate given what she's gone through in such a very short period of time. And Jan, if you're still listening, your story will impact a number of lives, and I would just say keep the faith and keep spreading the word, because your message will save lives.
And listen, we'll be back next week with a different topic, a different guest. Not sure what it is. Lewis and I will figure that out this week at some point. But we ask you to go to the recoveryboys.com. The website's getting kind of jazzed up a little bit. Lewis, I hadn't even told you about all. And we also have a logo, I think, that we'll present. So we have enjoyed doing this show. Our goals are very simple. That's to be a resource for the people who listen to this in the local area, and also through the podcast anywhere in the country. So if you have ideas or questions, you can go to the recoveryboys.com and send us a message, and we really appreciate you listening to us tonight. Good night.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys on WFJA. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.